discussion today, and I thank the Minister for staying in the chamber. I am incredibly proud of the generous and warm welcome that the Irish people have already demonstrated to those fleeing the horrific violence in the Ukraine. The collective condemnation of this unacceptable Russian aggression and heartfelt expression of solidarity with the people of the Ukraine speak volumes about our citizens. I do also want to acknowledge and commend the approach that the government has taken to date. I think you move very rapidly, very progressively in relation to this humanitarian crisis, and you reacted in a very open manner, and I think that that has translated very much into a sort of comfort for those who are coming to Ireland. I think they recognise that they are very much welcome and that we will do what we can to support them. But I think the challenge of what we faced is absolutely not lost on anybody, and it is going to be very, very difficult. As you said earlier on, we have never experienced a crisis like this, and it will involve us all working together as society, working together as a parliament. Really, this will be a collective effort on our part. I have spent a lot of time over the last few weeks working at a local level in Wicklow, where there has been a high intake of refugees, particularly into the North Wicklow area, and groups of volunteers that were working across every single level of our community. And I think that was replicated. It's not just a Wicklow thing, it's replicated across the entire country. And so my comments here today reflect the feedback that I'm getting from those volunteers and those people who were offering that support. And I have already spoken to you, Minister, in relation to some of the feedback that I've been getting. But I suppose what I want to get across is this is not a criticism of the government. I think, that the government's, as I said, response so far has been good. But there are gaps and there are issues that do need to be addressed. What's been seen within the volunteers and indeed within the frontline staff is that many are actually burnt out at this stage. Many are facing their own traumas and their own experiences that they're not equipped for, and I think that's something that we do need to be cognizant of and acknowledge. They are working into the early hours, as you would have seen even within your own department and other departments' officials. People are working from 8 a.m. until 3 o'clock in the morning trying to provide the necessary supports. And trying to juggle work and family life. Indeed, there's a group in Wicklow where they are now actually have come together to cook dinners for each other's families, so that once they get home from work that they can just start working with the refugees, which is just an incredible level of commitment. But I don't think it's sustainable. And I suppose at this point in time, I do think that the government needs to provide and put in place more formal structures of support, because I think the heavy reliance on volunteers and civil society that was necessary in the first month or in the first phase of this, I do think we need to move on from that at this stage, and that there needs to be a more clearly coordinated and accountable response from government. What I think and what I've seen to date, I think what we're missing is we need to have a national structure, a national framework. We need to have the local structure in place, and then there needs to be communication between those two structures. And even when it comes to simple things like who is in charge, I had initially believed that you were the minister responsible for the whole of government response to this humanitarian crisis. But indeed, yourself and your department in relation your remit is in relation to accommodation. And I think at this stage we do need a senior minister who is responsible and has that sole responsibility to drive this response, to bring all the different departments together and make sure that we have a very coordinated whole of government response and framework in place. So I think what we need is a clear national framework that outlines the roles and responsibilities of this government across areas of social protection, health, education, housing and justice, and that should include guidance and standards, monitoring frameworks and audit procedures. Now, Minister, I do recognise that this isn't something that we had ever envisaged and the government had ever envisaged was required, and I would imagine people were sort of quite hopeful coming out of COVID for a time to just get working on the normal matters that would normally be there for departments. And unfortunately this crisis has happened, but I do think that clear framework is absolutely required. I think there is a need for an adherence to international standards for humanitarian responses, and in particular the internationally agreed minimum standards for child protection in emergencies and the minimum standards for education in emergencies. We need a strategy to engage and coordinate between national, local and non-governmental sector, and communication and guidance is fundamental to a successful local response in this regard. I get the sense from listening to yourself and listening to the other ministers talking today, there is a huge amount happening within each department. But in some instances, I think it's happening in silos, and I also don't think that that's been communicated down to a local level. So I think those communication gaps need to be addressed. I think there needs to be a clear plan to ensure that services provided to refugees by the philanthropic community, church, NGO or individuals are subject to minimum standards to ensure child protection, data management and coordination with national systems. And that essentially that we are moving to a place where government services are ultimately accountable to uphold and protect the rights it has guaranteed to Ukrainian refugees. Look, we are in an emergency phase of this situation, but I think that is where we need to be going, and hopefully government can get those structures in place quickly. As I said, it's not just about the national structure, it's also about the local structure, and I do understand and I do welcome the community response teams are being put into each local authority. They were really successful during COVID, and I think the communities really responded well to them, and that framework is in place, and hopefully it can be reactivated very quickly. But I do think there needs to be a sort of standard or an overview of what's happening. My understanding is some authorities have set that up again, others haven't, and I think there's still a little bit of lack of clarity around what their functions are and how it will be rolled out and when it will be rolled out. I also think there needs to be, I understand that your department is bringing in a number of refugees into large accommodation centres, and probably the provision of services to those people will be easier. I think it's going to be harder to target and assist those who are coming into family homes, and I think there needs to be consideration as how we can actually create those linkages for people who are living with individuals across the country. One of the things that's really, I suppose, been made clear to me is that the requirements being placed on those large provision centres at the moment seem to be just primarily in relation to the provision of board and a bed and food. And I think at this stage we should be expanding that and looking beyond just the sort of the bare essentials. Things like laundry facilities. How do people wash their clothes? How are they going to provide school lunches? Is there kitchen facilities? Are the refugees allowed, is there a room that they can gather in? A social room where they can mingle, where they can get English lessons. Those are the kinds of services I think that we should be requiring of the accommodation providers, if possible. One other issue that's been raised with me is, the hotels are providing very standard 3 meals a day. When you have a baby who's looking for, not solid foods, or they don't eat according to our time frames. So it's all those kind of things that I think that will be ironed out as we go through, but I think that's just something I'd just like you to have in mind when you're engaging with those accommodation providers. In relation to education, I think education is going to be an absolutely key function and a key component of providing some stability and support, not only to the children and the students coming in, but I think to their mammies as well. Having for a parent to know that their child is happy in school, that itself will bring huge comfort to them. And I know many schools have gone above and beyond to actually take students into their schools and classrooms and into their hearts. To date, I do think that there needs to be a guidance from the department in relation to enrolment policies. Schools at the moment cannot go outside their enrolment policy in taking individuals in, and I do think that the Minister needs to give a clear guidance that actually we are in an emergency situation and there should be some provision to override a school's enrolment policy in order to enable schools to actually take those students in. And it isn't just also a matter of finding a place for a student. You know, schools don't have English language supports, they don't have mental health supports, so there will be ongoing resourcing that will need to be provided. In relation to health, I've spoken to you about this before, Minister, but I do think it is absolutely critical that refugees coming in have access to GP care within the first 24 hours of arriving in a centre, and dehydration and a lack of prescription medication is proving very, very difficult for them. I've run out of time. I have a huge amount more to say, but as I said, I do think that this is an issue that we are going to have to work together. I hope that, I hope that we can, but I think we also need to work quickly on it. And I will keep in touch with you in relation to any